A compelling report shows how intense the house-to-house fighting in Pokrovsk is. We want to address that today, as well as a bizarre accident that cost Russian pilots their lives. All that and everything that has happened along the front and behind it is here in this situation report on the Ukraine war. Heilige Stro says, "Save the most now with my code at Holy." Since the war began, Russians have launched over 13,000 cruise and ballistic missiles at Ukraine. About 100,000 attack drones in the style of the Shahed and 110,000 glide bombs have also been used. Just last week, the Russian side used 1,600 attack drones, 1,200 glide bombs, as well as 70 ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. Let's move on to the developments along the front. I don't have any changes to report from Sumy, but south of Vovchansk, in the Vovchansk region, we do have some changes. There it is, south of Vovchansk, the first Russian soldiers have arrived near Vilcha. This is most likely an infiltration, but it shows us that the Russians have managed to cross the open terrain above and are increasingly threatening to encircle Vovchansk from the south. We have been observing Russian activities in this area for a while now, including here in the southern part of Vovchansk, and now we are seeing developments in this direction. The Russians obviously want to cut off the Ukrainian supply lines, and to do so they have also carried out attacks here on the reservoir. So we have a report here that the bridge in the center was attacked, and we have a video showing how the dam at the southern end of the reservoir was attacked and the road running over it was destroyed. We can see it here. This is the reservoir, and here the bridge has been cut off, and here is the reservoir. Of course, this completely prevents east-west communication at this point. That means these Ukrainian positions in this entire area are supposed to be weakened by the Russians advancing there and dropping bombs in the rear area to cut off the bridge. That's all from the region. Otherwise, we have no reports from the entire eastern area. Probably, among other things, due to the weather, the intensity has decreased somewhat. We only have new reports from Siversk, and from Siversk we've documented the Russians themselves advancing in Siversk. We have it right here at this spot. There, they are already in the center of Siversk. They have crossed the railway line that roughly divides the town. And in another geolocation we see how the Russians have advanced a bit further to the west. However, south of that, it is obvious that the Ukrainians have at least achieved temporary successes. Here, an attack by the Russians on a building has been documented, which of course proves that they believed there were Ukrainians there at that time. And that's in Sviatopokrovsk, where there were recently Russian soldiers. So they were at least temporarily pushed back at this point, and at least stopped for the moment. You can also stop spam callers and spam emails. You can also stop spam today's sponsor, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Do you know what really annoys me? Unwanted emails or even calls. Today's sponsor, Incogni, has a very simple business model. For a small fee, our data is deleted online. We all accept terms and conditions without reading them. Often, even with free offers, often we agree to the collection of our personal data, which is then sold to data brokers. That's not just our email addresses and names, but often also our date of birth, home addresses, and purchases. Weezer, every search query, every product you look at can ultimately be recorded. This data can then be used for spam, but also for many other things. Insurance can become more expensive if your behavior is considered risky because of your browsing history. Banks could deny loans if the data indicates a lack of willingness to repay. Incogni is here to prevent exactly that. Basically, it ensures that we don't have to pay all the costs for what we use for free on the internet. You sign up, give the company permission to act on your behalf, and then they get to work deleting our data. I can directly track progress and see my data has already been deleted from 136 data brokers. If brokers cause issues, Incogni persists until my data is gone month after month. They continue to protect my privacy. New entries are immediately deleted by Incogni again. If you also want your privacy back, then click the link in the description. Doing so supports the channel and gives you a 60% discount with my link. Since September last year, I have had an annual contract so that they keep deleting my data regularly, and I now receive significantly fewer emails. At the same time, I am grateful that you are supporting the channel. But let's get back to the video. We continue in the direction of Kostiantynivka, and there we have geolocation again. The Russians have been seen southwest of Pretechune, We have them here at this spot. Is that directly west of Prititshune? And then we have them up here on the connecting road, which means roughly at this spot and up here. So we see a tendency of the Russians to move further towards Kostiantynivka. At this point, the Russians have also been spotted in Kostiantynivka itself, namely here at these fortifications, at these trenches directly east of the city. A Russian soldier was attacked there. Ukraine, on the other hand, we see in the south of the city, that's where they were seen and attacked by the Russians. That means we still have a Ukrainian presence in the southernmost houses of Kostiantynivka, even now. The southeastern Dhaka area has been contested for months now in the south of Kostiantynivka itself. So in the actual city, the main city, we still have a Ukrainian troop presence, and that's the update from the Kostiantynivka area. I have no changes to report from the direction of Dobropilya. Now let's move on to the changes toward the Pokrovsk and Myrnograd pocket. There we have the Russians once again. On the western edge of Rudinska, which means once again Rudinska is heavily contested, the Russians are now roughly here at this spot. Rudinsky is one of the important anchors where the Ukrainians have to stop the Russians, where the Russians have to be stopped. If Pokrovsk and Myrnograd are to continue to be supplied, the Ukrainians more or less have to control Rudinsky and Krasny-Liman, and both are now contested. Accordingly, we also see geolocations from the city of Pokrovsk itself there and from Myrnograd. Here we have the Ukrainians in the north of Myrnograd. They are still operating there. And we have the Russians in the south advancing toward the center. That's at these two locations we have them. On the one hand, we have the Ukrainians here as expected, but the Russians are now here at this point. So they are slowly advancing north and increasing the pressure on Myrnograd itself. That's it from the direction of Pokrovsk for the moment. We'll continue first with the other front developments. There, in the direction of Pokrovsk, we have a geolocation of Ukrainian troops raising their flag in Tisha. Taik has most likely been liberated by the Ukrainians again. There were recently Russian soldiers there, probably just an infiltration, but now the village is back in Ukrainian hands. The front is also moving further towards Dobropilya. At first it was heading towards Huliapole. At first there were Russian soldiers in Dobropilya, and they gave the impression that they had captured the northern part of the village. Then there was Ukrainian presence there again, and now we have new indications of Russian presence in the northeast of Dobropilya. So the village is increasingly contested. Here, in this area to the south of it, Russians have also been spotted in Huliapole itself. This is the area that we assess here as contested territory. According to the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, Russian soldiers have been seen there. There are new geolocations from the Ukrainians, but all from this area here. And if we look at the deep state map, this area is still attributed to the Ukrainians. We now have visual confirmation of Russian presence in the easternmost houses, at least north of the river. That's it for the changes on the ground. If we look at the overall situation, it's more or less unchanged. For the moment, the Russians are not really making progress towards Huliapole-Pokrovsky. But that doesn't mean it has led to a lasting change, to a permanent improvement of the situation. That still remains to be seen. In Pokrovsk, the pressure continues on the Ukrainian defenders in Pokrovska and Myrnograd in the pocket. For the moment, there is no sign that the Russians are pulling back. Kostiantynivka, the Russians keep attacking the city's edge and are gradually advancing from the south. But here too there is hardly any real movement. While it increasingly seems that Siversk is about to fall and that Siversk will be firmly in Russian hands by the end of the year, at least that's possible, otherwise there is little movement. So let's move on to an article that goes in depth about Pokrovsky and the developments there. That was in the Telegraph. If I'm not mistaken, let me check quickly. Yes, it was in the Telegraph. It reports that Ukrainian soldiers are sometimes only meters away from the Russian ones. Sometimes in one house there's a man, then in the neighboring house there are Russian soldiers, and in the next house there are Ukrainian soldiers again. Sometimes they are within shouting distance of each other and even call out to one another. But soldiers often don't attack Russian soldiers they see infiltrating. They let them pass so as not to reveal their own position, because if they're discovered during the attack, they'll of course be fought afterward. We can see it this way. Russian soldiers often advance under drone surveillance, so when fired upon, Ukrainians expose their position. This is a tactic that has been repeatedly reported. The Russians use less well-trained soldiers to identify Ukrainian positions with their deployment and then attack those positions with better trained soldiers. And here we see how the Ukrainians try to respond to this by sometimes letting Russian soldiers pass by them at close range and only reporting that they are passing, in the hope that their own drone forces would then destroy the Russian soldiers. Of course, this also means that a single Russian force can't be stopped so easily upwards. And that's an important report. It's often stated that positions remain under control, which is what's reported here. That means Ukrainian commanders are reporting to their higher-ups that certain positions are still in Ukrainian hands, even if that's not the case anymore, or only a wounded person remains in the position, and the explanation is that this way an order for a counter-attack is avoided, because in such cases the military leadership does not accept the loss and instead orders a counter-attack. And by reporting that the position hasn't been lost, even though no one is there anymore, you don't have to carry out a counterattack and therefore don't suffer the losses, especially in a position of weakness where an attack would be connected with extremely high personal risk and could possibly mean your own end. Of course, that's one explanation for why we have geolocations that give us the impression that the situation in Pokrovsk is devastating. Meanwhile, military leaders admit the situation is tough, but say it's still under control. That would be one way, for example, to explain this. Of course, it must also be clearly stated here that this is a huge problem, because it may be reasonable for the unit itself not to allow itself to be sacrificed, not to wear itself out in a senseless attack in which they generally see no point. But if this is reported as being under their own control and is shown as such on the relevant maps, then sometimes the adjacent units will rely on that, and they believe their flank is covered, when in reality that's no longer the case. So even here, it could be that the Ukrainians are making their own situation more difficult and sometimes causing serious problems for their own side by passing on such false position reports. Not just from the Russian side to explain successes, but also from the Ukrainian side to cover up failures. Drone pilots have now been specifically targeted by infiltrators who apparently searched for them deliberately in order to eliminate them. That's why the drone pilots have been withdrawn. Normally they were always just a bit behind the infantry so they could support them effectively. And that is now causing problems when fighting the Russians as they enter the city itself. Everything is in this article. That means we can imagine it. Previously, Ukrainian drone pilots would have been in this area and would therefore have only had a short flight time to the south to attack Russian soldiers there. But if your own drone pilots are here now, for example, in some basement here, then the time is much longer. And we have to understand it that way. Of course, we can relate that to the previous report. If a Ukrainian soldier here says, on Zonzuchtstrasse, 3 Russian soldiers are passing by me now, then the Ukrainian drone pilot, who is a kilometer away or 500 meters away, can sprint out from his cover, set down the drone and launch it. And he can engage those 3 soldiers a minute, 2 minutes later at the latest. However, if he is several kilometers away, 2 to 3 kilometers, he might still be comfortably within range, to engage these Russian soldiers, but then more time has passed before the drone arrives. The connection to the Russian soldiers has been lost. By now they've taken cover somewhere and might not be detected anymore, which of course leads to further problems. Then we have a report from the Russian side, fighter bomber. That's a Russian mill blogger who is very well connected within the air forces and is considered trustworthy when it comes to reporting Russian losses. He reports here that a Russian fighter bomber, it must have been a Sukhoi 24 or a Sukhoi 34, it was in a hardened aircraft shelter, one of those fortified shelters that the Russians are building now, and there the ejection seats were triggered and the navigator or weapons systems officer was on board. Both of them died. This is not a correct statement here. On Telegram itself, it is translated as non-survivable injury, so both of them died as a result. That is confirmed. Absurd story. So both ejection seats supposedly shot out of the plane. The cause remains completely unclear. Whether it was sabotage or some kind of technical error is pure speculation at this point. And while the Russians lost 2 pilots in this way, the Ukrainians also lost a pilot who crashed aboard a Sukhoi 27. It's not entirely clear yet. There are reports that he was the navigator. It could be that it was a Sukhoi 27UB. That would be the two-seater, which is used for pilot training, but is also combat capable and in all likelihood is also used by the Ukrainians in frontline missions. Accordingly, there might have been a second pilot on board. That is not clear at this point. What is confirmed is that a Ukrainian pilot has died, and another Sukhoi 27 is said to have been lost as well. Ukraine's Sukhoi 27 fleet is now likely down to about 20 aircraft. There probably aren't any more left at this point. Then we have reports from the Russian troop generation. It's not exactly that, but it's in that area. The Russian government has signed several agreements with the Indian government, including some about armament projects. But Russia will now also allow Indian migrant workers into its own country without restrictions, meaning without any quantitative limitation. This aims to address the labor shortage, which ranges from 700,000 to 1.5 million people, depending on the sector. We've often mentioned that many, especially well-educated people have left Russia, haven't we? Plus, likely 1 million people were lost because of it. Missing, killed, captured and wounded on the Russian side. That means there is simply a shortage of workers, and at least part of this shortage is supposed to be compensated for in this way. And finally, we have some developments from the Ukrainian side. They have published pictures of the new Myrnograd 7, which is the latest model of their own sea drones. And here we can not only see the Starlink for navigation, but in this case we also see short-range air-to-air missiles again. Only this time they are American Sidewinder Air Intercept Missile, 9 Sidewinders that are mounted on it and therefore come from Western production. And we can see that these are arms that can be swung upwards, and we can see that clearly here as well. The stabilized optics with which the targets can be aimed at. The missiles themselves are actually intended for air-to-air use, but they can also be used from the ground, although with reduced range. And it has now been confirmed that Ukrainian forces have shot down Russian aircraft using air-to-air missiles launched from sea drones. This allows the Ukrainians to effectively engage fighter jets and helicopters. And on the Russian side, they had started to counter the sea drones with their own helicopters, which can keep up well and are slow enough that a door gunner, a soldier sitting at the open side door, can simply destroy them with a machine gun. Of course, that's no longer so easy when a heat-seeking missile comes in to shoot down the helicopter. And that's it for now. With today's situation report, as I said, there's nothing else to report today. Next Wednesday at 8 p.m. German time, there will be the next situation report with a live stream. And if you want to save with Incogni, then use the link in the description. That's all for now. From Torsten Heinrich, thank you very much for your attention, and see you soon. I'd also like to sincerely thank the supporters, especially Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Komp, Lieutenant Jans van Eck, and Uwe de Vren. Nickname Tuebib, Carsten Schultz, Gulaschnasche 4000, Tequila 42, Badass Lawyer, Vision Sound Lab, POK If 1, WU Mahamori, Robert Veal 1528. Many thanks to Janice Gu, Anti-X, Sasha Mueller, Cunningham, and Eustress. This wouldn't be possible without them.